Hi, I'm Tim, welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Since its international relaunch over the last decade, the Rolex Tudor brand has surged from a one-time point of entry to the Rolex empire into a collection theme in its own right. No longer a starting point, many collectors will now start and stay with Tudor as a collection theme. Does the Tudor Heritage Black Bay have what it takes to rival the Rolex Submariner? We find out today. Launched in 2012, the Tudor Heritage Black Bay embodies everything that makes current-day Tudor a successful brand. Substantial capability and technical chops, value, and a heritage-inspired nostalgic look that draws equally on the Tudor and Rolex heritage of shared design, which includes cases, styles, and bracelets, and this watch has a little bit of all three. A watch that evokes the 1950s and 60s with a little bit of the 70s in the form of the snowflake hands. Nevertheless, it is a thoroughly modern timepiece on the wrist with an imposing stance, 41 millimeters in diameter, 14.9 millimeters thick, and lug-to-lug, because of the pivoted end links, a surprisingly accommodating 50 millimeters. Now, the timepiece is very solid, and as you can see, it's all of modern construction materials and tolerances. The vintage look is evocative, but at the same time, this is a current-day dive watch that would easily meet the ISO standards. Jumping to the bracelet, you can see that it's what's known as a skeuomorph, something that's designed as a sort of oblique reference to another formally similar but structurally distinct entity. The bracelet has the rivet style, as you would have seen on the 1950s and 60s Rolex divers, and then it's a three-link design with some obvious relation to the Rolex Oyster, which, it should be noted, was in the day fitted to Tudor watches. Satin finish over the tops, polish on the outer faces. You have the form of rivets, but the fact of screws, as this is sized conventionally using screws. They're actually spring-loaded ceramic pin snaps inside the clasp to ensure that the tolerances remain tight over the years, as they will never wear down. Now, it's a very secure clamshell closure, and you can see the Tudor shield in the form of the kerf used to dig in your nails. It's nicely made, handsomely finished, and as you can see internally, it is redoubtable. There are 3 divots drilled, so you can change the anchoring point of the bracelet, but take note, there is no fold-out dive extension here. So what you have is a bracelet that's solid, a clasp that inspires confidence, but ultimately not quite the same degree of adjustability as many dive watches in the segment and the price point. The case flank is designed to evoke Tudor and Rolex, what else, but with a nostalgic nod to the era when both Tudor and Rolex cases featured hand-finished bevels, and I do love these bevels in profile. They add a little bit of character to the case that's lacking on the blockish and squared off Rolex Super case. They're mechanically finished, make no mistake, but they are handsome. The crown with the pre-1968 Tudor Rose logo, and the dial on the in-house caliber Black Bays with the shield, which is the post-1968 Tudor logo. This is reference 79230N. The watch features a rotating bezel with an anodized aluminum insert and a micro knurling on its outer face, so you can get an easy grip, even when your hands are wet, sweaty, or gloved. I like the micro knurling. It's sharp and precise. Have a listen. The detent is loud and crisp. Make no mistake, you will find your spot, and alignment with the minute hand is easy. Dive bezels are the world's best chronographs. I've long said this, and there's no downstream maintenance cost for a bezel. The dial, as with the rest of the watch, is flavored by a look back, not in anger, but in nostalgia, and you have a handsome gilt-style printing in gold, applique numerals that the original Tudor Submariners generally would never have known, and a matte dial base with a chapter ring outboard. Now, all of that's evocative of the 50s and 60s, but the snowflake-style hands, those are actually evocative of the Tudor Submariners made from the late 60s through the 1970s. So it's got a little bit of a link to the Pelagos right there, and the watch is a little bit of a pastiche as well of several different generation of Tudor subs. You can see that there is an anodized black shoulder around the crown outboard, and this being an expressly vintage-driven design, there are no crown guards. The watch features a screw-down crown and 200-meter water resistance, and underneath the case back, you have a Tudor manufacturer caliber. As you can see, written on the case back, MT5602, 25 joules, automatic winding, 70-hour power reserve, COSC chronometer, stop seconds, 4 Hz beat rate, full bridge, free sprung, and of course, It is a very impressive and tough timekeeper thanks to water resistance, a full balance bridge architecture, and the anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, a feature you still cannot get on a Rolex. We'll throw this one on the wrist one more time so you can get maybe a broad view of it on my wrist. Remember, my wrist is 16 centimeters circumference. Take a quick look. Now you see the watch from overhead. Now you see the watch down the barrel. And now you see the watch in profile. That is the Heritage Black Bay. And this is the Tudor Submariner. Often described as the no date, that's a bit of a neologism, as Rolex simply describes this watch as the Submariner. Technically, the 116610 is the Submariner date. This is the real deal. You can trace it to the earliest Submariner references of 1953 and the prototypes prior to that. This is the watch that immediately evokes the very first examples of Rolex's pillar timepiece, its flagship, and the model worn by everyone from, well, yours truly, Jason Maine, on our Thursday show, to Sean Connery himself. The watch on my wrist is more compact than the Tudor in almost every regard. Though they're only separated by 1 millimeter of nominal size, the Rolex is a more wearable 40. It's a thinner watch by far. The difference between the two is 12.5 millimeters for the Sub and 14.9 for the Black Bay. This is a watch that is actually a little bit broader across the wrist than the Tudor, but it doesn't feel or look it. Zoom in real close, and you can see that the timepiece is 47.9 millimeters lug-to-lug. If you're going to throw this on an Everest or a rubber B-strap, that's the lug-to-lug distance point to point across the case. But if you include these solid end links, which expand the watch, I should say, across the wrist, then you wind up with a broader span of 51 millimeters across the wrist. Let's give ourselves a little bit less aperture here, zoom out and get a better sense of the contrast. There you can see the watch on the wrist, 51 millimeters end link to end link, 20 millimeters the spacing between the lugs, and I should have mentioned the Tudor has a 22 millimeter spacing between its lugs. So 20 here, 22 on the Tudor. The bracelet is the Rolex Oyster latest version, and I like that this watch isn't trying to be a nostalgic piece. It is a heritage design that has never changed. It's the Porsche 911, not a retro car or a retro watch, just continuous, having never been out of production. Satin finish across the tops, polish on the outer faces. As with the Tudor, screws fix the removable links here. Unlike the Tudor, we actually have a double locking system. What at first glance appears to be a simple clamshell actually includes a beak and a hook internally. So you can see this vertical trigger snaps into position, it's articulated, it must be lifted to unlock. You can't simply pull it open even with the clamshell up. The clamshell makes it sure tight with a second locking factor and then a little kerf in its own right so you can dig your nail in. But it's inside the clasp that things really change, and in the Rolex's favor. You have a sliding Glidelock system, so you have the ability to make 2 millimeter incremental changes up to 20 millimeters in total. You have the ability to pull it all out if you want to put it over a dive suit or a thick winter coat, and then you can make these incremental changes, and 2 millimeters at a time, so you can use it for fine-tuning the size. You'll also note that there is a half link in the bracelet for additional fine-tuning. So 20 millimeters all out in 10 steps. Rolling back to the case, you can see what I mentioned earlier, the squared-off lug profile and sheer sides of the so-called Rolex Super case. We first saw it in 2005 on the original 6-digit reference GMT. But it's handsome because it's relatively shallow in cross-section. It is very slim, unlike the broad side of the Tudor. There are crown guards here. As this is not a retro watch, Rolex is giving you sheer protection on both sides of the trip-lock crown. Screw-down crown here, 300 meters of water resistance. Rolex also has a different philosophy with respect to knurling, as we have a rather large and sharp profile. I find both to be easy to grip, but there's no doubting that the action of the Rolex bezel is far superior to that of the Tudor. It sounds better, it feels better, and I should say that with a platinum-filled ceramic insert, it is both more scratch-resistant and richer. Listen to it up against the mic. Precise 120 click. You can easily locate the sapphire capped bezel pearl over the minute hand with precision thanks to the 120 clicks. It feels as though it's been refined to the nth degree, specifically tuned for the feel and the sound. The experience of operating this bezel, it's as good as the pushers on something like a Lange datograph. It's that sharp. It's that satisfying. The dial, rather than being a matte on the Tudor, is actually gloss black lacquer here. And rather than rose gold plated indices, here we have the real thing. White gold indices, white gold hands to resist tarnish and oxidation over time. Underneath the caseback, Rolex caliber 3135. Still using a jeweled staff winding system. It is very, very smooth with twin Teflon coated reversing wheels to make it more so. Bidirectional winding, 48-hour power reserve like the Tudor, full balance bridge and a free-sprung index for shock resistance, COSC chronometer, but Rolex going one step further, saying that the watch is then tested not as a bare movement as with the chronometer test, but as a fully assembled watch to no worse than -2 + 2 seconds per day. The Tudor meets the COSC test, which is -4 + 6. Might it be better? Perhaps, but Rolex puts a warranty on this watch and promises you -2 + 2 or better. That's a big deal. The movement as with the Tudor, full balance bridge, free sprung index, but there is a niobium zirconium, so non-silicon metal hairspring here. It's still anti-magnetic, but not quite to the same degree as silicon. And of course, the watch features stop seconds for precise calibration against a dive timer prior to taking the plunge. So let's talk about the advantages of these two watches. The Tudor has a lot going for it. This is a watch that sells new for $3,750. And pre-owned, it holds its value pretty well. You'll see these selling with boxes and papers for $3,500 to $3,800. That's darn impressive by the standards of modern luxury watches, which tend to depreciate like Jaguars. This is a watch with tech on its side. 70-hour power reserve for the Tudor versus 48 for the Rolex, and a silicone hairspring here. It's not high horology in the handmade sense, but it is tech in the sense that it is thermally resistant and highly anti-magnetic. The watch is unassuming with no brand baggage. This isn't a Rolex, although it does include some of the best styling cues from Rolex's own past. Nevertheless, no one's ever going to ask you if this is a real watch while you're wearing it, nor is anyone going to size you up for an immediate term robbery. And the timepiece isn't going to prompt unwanted and rude questions while you're alone with a date, a friend, or a spouse eating dinner at a cafe on the curbside. This is a watch that gives you Rolex quality, but with discretion and no resentment. That's a bigger deal than you might think in some parts of the world. The watch is also equipped with better lume by far. This is a timepiece that's easier to see at night, and that's no small matter for a tool-style watch designed to be used in the darks of the depth. No crown guards. I find that there's no additional danger to a crown when you eliminate crown guards. I've never seen a crown saved by shear guards in my life. This just makes it easier to actuate the crown. When you need to screw it out, you don't have to worry about those shouldered crown guards creating difficulty, especially when your hands might be wet, sweaty, or gloved. This is a dive watch. Finally, I love those beveled lugs. They're handsome, they're evocative, nostalgic, and charming. And this watch is simply oozing charisma. Let's discuss the elder statesman and what must be described not as the challenger, but as the defending champion. Well, this is a watch, first and foremost, that has true timeless quality. This is a little bit of a pastiche of design cues, as I mentioned, whereas this is far more coherent. It looks like every Submariner ever made. The first 1953 clients and beta testers for the prototypes in the day, they would recognize this watch as a Submariner. It'll be recognized as a Submariner in 100 years from now. So it's a timeless style that is immune to planned obsolescence. I'll also mention that on a technical basis, this is a watch with a far superior clasp. It feels more secure. It has that double locking factor with the pivoting trigger, the vertical trigger system, and the clamshell. Plus you have the Glidelock system and the easy adjustability that comes with it. This is something that, frankly, the Tudor should at least try to emulate as an all-for-nothing pullout, because Doxa and Oris are able to give you all-or-nothing pullouts on watches that cost $3,000 or even $2,000. So the Tudor should have an internal adjustment system for a dive suit, even if it's just a single machined pullout system. It doesn't have to be Glidelock as with the Rolex, Advantage Rolex. I'll also mention that on a technical basis, the ceramic with the platinum fill makes this a more resilient and richer bezel. The sound and the feel make it a more pleasurable and precise bezel to locate. This is a timepiece that is a blue chip, the opposite of the no baggage, no nonsense Tudor. If you want people to notice your watch, if you want status and stature to follow your wrist wherever it goes, this is the brand. I'm not into it, and I know a lot of you guys are not into it, but if that's a factor, and these are vanity products, you got to go with the Rolex. Let's also talk about diving depth. Theoretical, sure, but 200 meters versus 300 meters, Advantage Rolex. And let's talk about warranty. Rolex backing this watch, still in production, with a 5-year warranty versus 2 for the Tudor. So this model launched back in 2012, which was the same launch year for the Black Bay, but the Black Bay then was 2 years. The Submariner is now up to 5 years warranty, and that is a huge deal. This is a watch that sells new for $7,500 and pre-owned for about $8,400 to $8,800. So as with the Tudor, it holds its value well, and I find it attractive that it's not obnoxiously marked up on secondary markets. You can get this watch with a little bit of a weight, not as absurd as a Daytona, a Date Sub, Hulk, or a GMT, or you can buy it pre-owned for only a small markup, which makes it a more appealing purchase at a time when some folks are bidding Daytonas and GMTs up to twice retail price. This is the unexpected winner for me. I expected to go with the no-nonsense, no-baggage value proposition Tudor, and I fell in love with this Submariner. The 114060 is the watch that I would pick from this catalog. The timeless style, Porsche 911. That analogy for me, it just seals the appeal of this watch. It will always be handsome. It will never be obsolete. It exudes quality, the clasp, the bracelet, the bezel. I feel like this is a more expensive product, and it should feel more expensive because it is. It has real history behind it, dating back to the original 1953 subs, and it's an unbroken string of watches that have never been revived and will never be considered retro watches. Again, purchasing this watch new or pre-owned, surprisingly reasonable by current Rolex aftermarket standards. And let's recall, this is a timepiece that has a remarkable span of warranty protection. So if you buy this watch, Rolex has your back. You guys, let me know, which of these two do you prefer? Is it the unimpeachable quality and timeless style of the Rolex, or the features and values of the Tudor? The Sub comes on strong, but the Tudor just has more loomed area and brighter lume overall. Advantage Tudor.